Good evening and a welcome to the debut of the Sevastopol Historical Society. I am just amazed at the turnout, so thank you very much. My name is Linda Waite, and earlier this year a group of volunteers got together and felt it was important that Sevastopol preserve its history and heritage. So tonight we are going to offer the first of what we hope to be a series of interesting and entertaining programs on the people, places, and events that formed Sevastopol. George Bassford was instrumental as one of Sevastopol's founding fathers, and there is definitely a story to be told about that. It is a privilege to have with us tonight 4 generations of Bassfords, and it is my pleasure to introduce them. We have great-granddaughter Betty Bassford Propson and her husband Vernon Dallaire. I don't know if you want to stand or... Most of them are in the front. Oh, raise your hand. There you go. Okay. We have great-granddaughter Patty Bell from De Pere with her son, and I'm sorry, I did not catch your name. Keith. Okay. And great-grandson Charles Bassford and his wife Beatrice. And going on to the next generation, we have Suzanne Southard, Steve Southard, and Propson and Stuart Propson. Okay. And then into the third generation, we have Samara and Zeb. Back there, Samara, I'm sorry. And into the fourth generation, and definitely the youngest people here, August, Elijah, and Lily. So thank you all for coming tonight. Our program is going to consist of an excerpt from a videotaping made at Bayside Cemetery. It was done a few years ago in front of the Bassford tombstone. After that, we have a slideshow presentation with some old-time photos. So feel free to ask any questions as we go through those photos. That will be narrated by Charlie and perhaps assisting from his sisters. And then we're going to have refreshments to celebrate a very special birthday, the 85th birthday of Betty Bassford Propson. So.
We have 3 children. Our son was born on the same day as my sister. It's his 56th birthday today. So I just spoke to him. He said to greet his dear auntie. That's why I'm doing that.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. Charlie, did you want to make any comments before we start the video?
Yes.
Okay.
I guess I'm never at a loss for words, as my wife says.
I can testify to that.
Well, Linda, thanks so much for all the good publicity you've given to this for this group. And I heard Eddie Allen and yourself on the air today, and it sounded really wonderful. So thank you. I appreciate it a great deal. When I was a lad, way back many years back in the 30s, I couldn't hardly wait to hear the melodic tune of the William Tell Overture. Some of you older people probably, we don't hear much of that today. But anyway, that heralded the beating of the Lone Ranger. Some of you probably remember that. I remember it said, from out of the glorious days of yesterday came the thundering hoofbeats of the great horse Silver. Some of you remember that. And then he said those great words, in a cloud of dust, a hearty hi-ho Silver. And of course, he had his old buddy, Tonto, and Tonto had a horse by the name of Scout, as I remember. So you may remember that. But let me tell you this. My great-grandfather, George Bassford, was not a character out of the past or someone's mind, a fictional character. He was a real man. Let me tell you that. My wife and I were just reflecting on the way here this evening. To me, it's almost unbelievable how these people existed. And with just a supply of food and water. I'm sure Grandpa George had a pistol or a gun or shotgun or something to kill rabbits or something. I know my wife related to me that her Aunt Elsie Miller was married to Russell Berry. Some of you probably remember those names. But anyway, she said she was so sick of rabbits that she hoped he never saw another rabbit again. So, and just think of the man of the no well, I don't know, and the huge trees. When I was a lad back in the 30s, some of those trees, those maple trees on the Bassford farm there, were 2.5 to 3 feet in diameter. Just think what they must have been back in the 1860s and 70s. I don't understand how those men, without even horses, they had horses later perhaps, I don't know, they had no machinery. All they had was a handsaw and an axe and a pickaxe and things. I don't know how they existed. I really don't. It's really amazing. People today just don't appreciate and understand what these people went through. But anyway, so Grandpa was not a fictional character. I can assure you that. He was a real man, a real Lone Ranger in a sense of all what he did. You'll see it on the videotape in a few minutes there. He had a varied life. Let me tell you, he did so many things. He handled all sorts of town offices and was the postmaster and does everything imaginable. I think the only thing he didn't do, someone told me, he wasn't a dog catcher. So, so at least he didn't do that. And of course, you'll see on the video that Grandpa George was married twice. His first wife was Sarah Seaton. He married her back in, I think it was about 1850. And she died in 1852, leaving him with 3 children. It was Bill, Eliza, and John. And then she died, and of course, he must have been a rather romantical man as well, because hardly a year and a half later, he married Johanna, her name was Elida Johanna Ressing. She had come from East Prussia for their dad. And they had half a dozen children. George Jr., he only lived to be about 29 years of age. And then, of course, it was Henry. I did a little research today and found that Henry was quite an enterprising man. He went out to the Dakotas, was in business there. Then he was in Nebraska, and they finally wound up out in Kalispell, Montana. And I guess that's where he died. I didn't get any farther than that. Then, of course, they had 3 girls, Emma, Amelia, and Augusta. And my cousin Pat just reminded me that Amelia died at about 15 or 16 years of age of a ruptured appendix, I believe, wasn't it, Pat? Yeah, she died quite young. Other than that, they all lived a fairly good life. Anyway, I found the old Bible that my grandpa had. Maybe Linda will lift it up with George's name. I can't let you get into it. It's so dilapidated and deteriorated because it's about 140 years of age. Anyway, I made some copies of the births and marriages and deaths of the people, so you're welcome to look at it. And Patricia was so kind to bring a book on. She has probably more information than I have. Anyway, I'm sure that, from what I understood, my grandmother, Anna Bassford Fail, who married Edward Fail later, I'll have more to say about that later. But they say he held church services and Sunday school in the house which is still existing out there on Dunn Road, County P, of course, in 42. Anyway, I'm sure that all the hard work that they did, there's evidence in the scriptures that he must have gone through those scriptures, that they're well read, and so I'm sure that he had to look for strength from the Lord by prayer and so forth. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. Anyway, one verse of scripture that comes to my mind: "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am weak and lowly in heart, and you'll find rest to your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And I'm sure George had to do that with all the hard work they had to do. Amazingly, he lived to be 72 years of age, and he and his, my grandfather died 3 days apart in 1902. And so I'm sure that they trusted in the Lord with all their heart and all, lead not to their own understanding in all their ways. They acknowledged God and his strength. So we had a very godly family, I believe. Even though George was an Episcopalian, was not maybe as strong a group of people today as we had back in those days, because remember, it came from England, from the Church of England, which is Episcopalian, of course. Anyway, so I believe there was the Lord Jesus Christ was very instrumental in their lives, and that's why he was able to do all the things that that he did. So I think that's about all I have to say right now, and then I'll answer some questions that they may surface after we're done. So then you want to start with it then, Linda, thanks so much.
Thank you, Charlie. Okay.
I have to take you back to 2000 when I was associated with the, well, they asked me, in fact, my sister Betty was supposed to do it, and I don't, for some reason or other, I got the job of talking about George at the cemetery walk back in August of 2000. So that's 11 years of it. Don't look at me now. I'm 11 years older than I was then. So somebody told me in the Army one time, Charlie from the Bassford family, he said, you know, you've got a face that only a mother can love. So, that's probably true. I don't know. The Bassfords were not particularly handsome, and well, the ladies were not too bad, but the men were not too handsome.
Okay. All right, we are at Bayside Cemetery in front of the Bassford tombstone.
Well, thank you folks for coming this afternoon. I appreciate your interest in historical things, and particularly the Historical Society, and especially our family, the Bassford family. I've been resurrected for a day. The Lord gave me leave here for a little bit of time to talk to you good friends, so forth. And obviously, I've been planted here many years ago, back in 1902. So I guess I'm a little bit tired and saying I'm 172 years old right now. But I guess I can still stand up here and address you folks. One of the biggest evidences that I lived in Door County was the fact that I, of course, planted here, but the other evidence that I like very much was the original home that we built in 1858, which is situated out on the place called the Farm. It's a thriving little enterprise out on Highway 57 on the way to Bailey's Harbor. And if you ever go out there, you should go in there. It'll cost you a few dollars, of course, to get in there. But to see the original log home that I constructed back in 1858 for my family. But anyway, the other evidence, if you ever travel north on the way to Egg Harbor, you will see the piece of land that I homesteaded. I'll have a little more to say about that in a few moments. I built what I considered quite a palatial home back there, a 13-room home with about 5-6 bedrooms because we had 9 children. And anyway, that farm home is still existing. I'm sorry that it's in rather dilapidated condition now. The other thing, right behind it, there was a long, narrow building. It was painted in red paint, beautiful building. And we called it the Halfway House. Many people were traveling and coming through Door County at times, just as they are today, but not, of course, the volume we have today. But from Green Bay to Gills Rock, Sturgeon Bay area is about halfway. So we would let the people stay there for nothing. They didn't have to pay anything and stay in our halfway house, but they had to provide for their own food. So we did charge them for food. We weren't in a money-making enterprise at that time, so forth. So, and then the thing I think that stands out a great deal of mine, we're in the town of Sevastopol here. That's an unusual name. The reason that Sevastopol was called Sevastopol, I happened to be a buff of the Crimean War, and it was a big battle fought down in the Crimean Peninsula, which is that piece of land that juts down into the Black Sea. And there is a town there located on that peninsula called Sevastopol with a B. Anyway, I liked that name, and so the men didn't like the B, so they changed it to V, and so it became Sevastopol. In that farm, in that little original farm home, that little log home that we had there, is where we adopted that name Sevastopol. So if you're ever out there, think about it. George Bassford's name is on there. George Bassford family, the original log home. I was born, of course, at a very tender age over in Nottinghamshire, England. You know, the British, they like to be terribly British, and they don't call a county like we call a county here. They call it a shire. They like that name a little bit. It's about 100 miles north of London, about in the middle of England. I didn't have much formal education. I think at that time, of course, when I was a young man just getting started, Queen Victoria became the British queen at that time, 1830, she ruled in 1837 to 1901, the British Empire, great time of peace. And so she just didn't get that started right away, the schools, although she was instrumental a little later on in getting the school started. But anyway, I had a lot of good schooling in the Episcopalian or Church of England, Anglican Church Sunday School. I learned the 3 R's there, and so I was not a complete dunce when it came to learning things, so forth. My dad said, go out and get yourself a job, George, and so I did. I went in the railroad business, and I became an expert at round table construction. You all know what a round table in the old days, that's how you turn locomotives around. I became an expert at that and so forth. And I fell in love about that time with a very lovely young lady who was also buried over here, Sarah Seaton. I met Sarah as a young man, and we fell in love, and were married in the year of 1850. Wasn't too long after that we had son Billy, so forth. Billy came to Sturgeon Bay, of course, with us, and later on, so forth, and lived in the lumber business years ago. Okay, we, as I told you, we had kind of the wanderlust, and we decided, since a lot of people were going over to America, we decided we'd like to come to America too. We went over to Liverpool and booked passage on a sailing vessel, and just think of this, it took us 6 weeks, 42 days to cross the Atlantic. And you'll never believe this, but I'm telling you the truth. It cost $17 for the passage for 3 of us, for my wife, Sarah, myself, and little Billy. Just think of that. However, we had to provide our own food, and we ate a lot of bread and cheese and things like that. We could purchase some on the ship, of course, but it was $17 fee. We landed in New York, lived in Brooklyn, and I secured a job. I had to get a job and support my family, and I got a job up in Albany, New York, and in railroad construction there. But that kind of petered out and so forth. And I knew there was a lot of construction going on over in Ontario. And Sarah and Billy and I moved over to Hamilton and got a job with the Grand Trunk Railroad, and I stayed there 3.5 years. And you might be interested to know that the man who hired me didn't get along too well with a 1,500-man crew, and I supplanted him, and I was boss over those 1,500 men. We got along handsomely. However, Sarah and I weren't really too happy with the situation in Canada because there were Indians roaming around there, and there were a lot of unrest and so forth. We decided to go back to the U.S., and we finally wound up out in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, at the foot of Lake Winnebago and so forth. And I still had the wanderlust. I wanted to look around and so forth and see if I couldn't find a place to settle down. And after about 6 days of walking around the state, we wound up in beautiful Door County. And I fell in love with a particular patch of land out in the piece of land out in what is now, of course, Sevastopol town. And I had saved enough money up by that time to purchase land. You won't believe this. $1.25 an acre is all we paid for that land, just for 204. And I subsequently bought another 80, so we had 320 acres of land, the largest holding in that particular town. But anyway, it's one of the saddest things that happened in my life at that time. After we had, of course, John and Eliza, besides Billy, is Sarah here, and I almost weep to think about it. She died at 28 years of age. Just think, to lose her. However, it wasn't too long. As a typical man looking for another wife. I was pretty young yet and so forth. And I met a lovely young woman by the name of Elida Johanna Ressing. She was a native of Prussia, had come over with her father, emigrated to America and so forth. And I married her. And she accepted my proposal and so forth. And that's when we built that first dwelling, as I told you about, back in 1856. I also built that large home residence in about 1870, when it's still on the foundation out there. Our family began to grow. My eyes aren't so good anymore after 172 years, so I have to read this to you. The family we had with George Jr., he died, and he's on this planet at 29 years of age. All my other children lived quite a while. Henry, Charlie, Emma, Amelia, and Augusta. I shouldn't say they all did, because Charlie is buried over there. He died. I'll have something to say about that in a moment. At 39 years of age. That was a sad one. I also owned between 500 and 1,000 acres of land, not for farming purposes, but for logging. We logged, of course, the peninsula was full of trees at that time. We logged off the larger trees and so forth and made them lumber out of them, as well as shingles to sell down in the Chicago and Milwaukee market. I became the postmaster for the area And also one of the most exciting things I had, we owned 2/3 interest in the ferry boat that went across the bay here in Sturgeon Bay. Of course, there wasn't any bridge at that time. That wasn't built till way back up in the 80s and so forth. I operated a cheese factory on the southwest corner of the farm. Another thing I enjoyed doing every spring was making maple syrup and maple sugar. We made about 1,500 pounds of maple sugar every year. The sons and I, we had a large evaporator there, and that existed up until just a few years ago. Another sad affair was that when I said my son Charles died in 1902, we both contracted pneumonia. Charlie died on January 22nd, and as I remember, January 25th. We were both buried in a joint funeral we had down here, common funeral. We were both buried. I'm right over here, and Charles is buried over there. And I just want to talk a little bit about my legacy. I don't like to toot my horn and so forth, but I believe that God gave me a great deal of energy and vitality with diligent work habits. That's what characterized my life. To summarize my life, I have to refer to all these things I did, kind of a jack of all trades. A pioneer landowner, businessman, lumberman, cheesemaker, dairy farmer, financier. I did have quite a bit of money and helped people and used it to for good purposes. Ferry boat owner, the local politician. I held all town offices except Justice of the Peace and Postman. I don't think I was the dog catcher, but I held a lot of other ones. Yeah. Now this is something I didn't say. This is what a Chicago paper said about me. People have said about George that my good reputation was attributed to a pioneering and fearless spirit who was unafraid in venturing into unknown circumstances, providing success in each enterprise I was involved in. At the same time, I exhibited a great deal of honesty and integrity. He followed biblical principles, and thus led by his Heavenly Father, he honored him by and with his life. And I might add to this, I helped build an Episcopalian or Anglican church here in Sturgeon. It burned down a little later on, not my fault. But anyway, it burned down, and they attended worship services there regularly after they rebuilt it, and had a profound effect on me and on my entire family. I wanted to just close with this saying I was named Gov, G-O-V. It was kind of humorous little name that they tacked onto me because of the numerous positions I held in the town here and the influence I had in the political scene. And I don't want to offend any of you good Democrats here, but I was a staunch Republican all of my days. Thank you, folks, for coming. I appreciate it. Now I'll go take my leave and go back to my grave for a while.
Subsequent to my presentation, a gentleman, he was in all sincerity, he wasn't laughing or anything, came up to me and said, Charles, he said, are you 172 years old? I said, do I look that old? I said, no. I said, I'm portraying Grandpa. Oh, he said, I thought you were 172. Very good. Actually, Patricia's, my cousin, brother is still living, so there are four living great-grandchildren. Pat's brother is Charles, isn't it? Charles is out in...
Charles Bassford,
Drapeau, yes. You know, that Drapeau, her father was, and the mother met down at Valparaiso University down in Indiana, right, yeah. So anyway, so there are four of us, first generation, you call them, I guess, yeah. So the only other, I'm not sure, I don't think there are any others. There could be, but I talked to Janet Hall. Janet, where are you? Janet? Oh, Janet? Janet has a lot of information on my uncle, great uncle would be William, who lived in Sturgeon Bay. I can faintly remember he and his dear wife, Aunt Charlotte. She was an Ash, A-S-H, and she knows a lot about it. She has look, if you want to speak to her afterwards, she can maybe give you more. She knows more about that side of the family than I do, but I'm not aware of any other great-grandchildren at all. Pat might know. Are there any, Pat, that you're aware of? I don't think so. No, I don't think.
The only one that there could possibly be would be from Uncle William's son, Everett, that settled up in Kitchener, Canada, right near Toronto.
It could be.
We visited up there years and years ago, but I have
I
never
don't
heard
know.
anything in recent years.
I don't know, yeah. All right, before we go on to the pictures, are there any questions that any of you may have that I could field, and I'll try to answer them for anyone? Right, yeah, any? Right, so we can go on with this. I think.
I was going to say, with that house there, that was built in
Two stages?
yes, and the part that's on this end was built first, and the one with the two porches, the upper and the lower porch, was built afterward. And you wouldn't know it looking at it from the outside, but you knew it from the inside, because we're connected upstairs. You had to step up.
I remember that, yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah. Pat, the reason Pat knows all this, because she, from the time she was 2 months old, lived with Grandma and Grandpa Edward Fail. That was my grandmother's second husband. She married him in about, I think, 1904, several, about 2 or 3 years, maybe 1905, I can't recall. But anyway, they lived in that house. Of course, I remember, I have fond memories. I remember all living out there, staying overnight even. Of course, Pat was there till, what, you were 18 years of age, right?
Well, when I graduated from good old Sevastopol over here.
Right, yep, she went to Sevastopol High School, right. Okay. Right, or then any other comments? So if you want to see Janet, if you're interested in what she has about that side of the family, go right ahead. I have the old Bible that Grandpa has, probably 140 years old. I can't open it because it's so dilapidated. But you can welcome to look at the births, deaths, and marriages that I photostated from. I dug them out and photostated them today, so you're welcome to look at that and determine that. Well, look at this one. This is Grandpa. He's rather a handsome dude, isn't he? That's me, Charles the First. I'm Charles the Third. My dad went by Hollis, but he was really Charles because he went by the middle. I suppose he didn't want two Charlies in the same house. I don't know, but anyway, then our son, who is 56 years old today, same as my sister, as I mentioned a moment ago, is Charles IV, and he has a son. Anyway, the amazing thing is that he was born on May 1st, 1978. Charles I, this gentleman, was born May 1st, 1862, 116 years previous to my son. So that's rather a coincidence, right? Yeah, Pat.
I wanted to say that how our grandmother met him. She was a schoolmarm. And that's, of course, before they had the consolidated schools, and the District 2 school was right on the end of their property. And, of course, she and he fell in love. That's because she was from Fish Creek.
Yeah, right, yeah, right. That's right. I'll mention that a little later in a minute. Her parents, in one of the pictures, owned a sizable tract of land in what is now Peninsula State Park. And the right of eminent domain, the state took it, and it's incorporated into the Peninsula State Park. Anyway, as you mentioned before, Charlie died on the 22nd of January 1902, just 3 days prior to his father, George, who we were speaking about, yeah. So I don't think he's too bad. And this is his house, as Pat mentioned, and it's still standing. It looks quite a bit different. Well, the same general look as it back 1970. Just think that's 130, 141 years ago that house has been in existence. I think they've done quite a bit of repairs on it because in those days they didn't have insulation and things like that. I imagine they worked at it pretty well. I know my father sold it, I think way back in 1959 about. I think he got $3,700 for that place. Just think of that. But just let me tell you something. I would have liked the farm, because that 320 acres, no one else was very interested. My own father said to me, "Charlie, why do you want to monkey with that? Go and do what you're going to do, go teaching or whatever." That's what I wound up doing. And I guess I kind of posed to my bride here, Beatrice, and anyway, she didn't say it, but I could tell by the look on her face. She said, "Either take me or the farm." So I took her, and I think I'm better off for it. Oh, thank the Lord for that. All right, so I have no. Pat, would you recognize any of them? Must have been the children there. I wouldn't know. Do you know who any of those children are on there? You think that's Grandma?
Well, sure. Yeah, I got the picture in that album. That's Grandma Phil and Grandma Bassford.
Oh yeah, this is Lida, yeah, and this was,
No,
would guess that this is my father and maybe Chester, the second boy. Yeah. And that might be Aunt Irma, I don't know. That you might know.
Your dad, I think, is on there, and isn't my mother on there? Yeah,
my
that
mother
was.
was only 9 or 10 years old, 12 years old at that time, right?
Yeah. I think that's the 4 children,
Right.
and,
This would be your mother, I'm not sure.
yeah, but this is after.
This is the one, Elida Elizabeth, 98.
Yeah, that had
That-
a Chester.
Amazing.
That was Chester and your dad, and my mother, and Irma, and the 2 grandmas, great grandma and the other one.
Yeah, my grandmother, Anna, told me one time that, this is kind of humorous little story, that they never had really a fight. They got along very well. 25 years ago, with Elida and George's home, of course, and they lived there. But Grandma said, Grandma Hale told me that one of the reasons she believed Grandma lived so long, she liked a little nip of brandy now and then, and she would keep her arteries clean. She didn't know at the time, but maybe that's why she lived until 98. She wasn't a sod or anything of drinking, but she liked a little nip of brandy now and then.
She said that it made her sleep better, and then when the price went up, she said she didn't need it anymore.
That's good. Right.
Grandma told me that.
Okay, so next. Oh, yeah. This is the house, of course, it's been reconstituted, rebuilt. It's over at the farm. That was built in 1858, as George portraying George said. But can you imagine that they raised any of the children in that little place? Right, yeah. Okay. Oh, here we're in the. Yeah, then we can turn.
Let's go back, Charlie, to the, this was a sign on the house. What'd you say?
Yeah, here we're in the, sure, let's start right here. This is good. That's my grandmother, Anna Evenson Bassford Vale, in the middle there, and that's her family, her mother, father. Those are the ones that owned the property up in, what's now Peninsula State Park. His name was Simon Evenson, and was a farmer, of course. And those are their 4 boys, was Martin and Edward and Tinas and Evan Tinas, they went by Tinas. Edward, Theodore, and then one more. Richard is one of the undertaker out in the Dakota, South Dakota, right? And back to the old farm again. Oh, it said stop at that one, Linda, with the old windmill. That's the old wooden windmill. That was replaced by a metal one years, and that served them, I guess, quite a few years. You can see the old building in the back was used for a granary back in here, and a machine shed. In fact, there was one building that's still standing. The main barn was torn down, I think, just a few years ago. George Evenson mentioned me. It was just torn down recently. The horse barn, yeah, right, back in there, yeah, but still standing there. You can see it's kind of dilapidated now. Okay, now this is my grandmother's family, and this is my grandma Anna over, let's see. Now this is Aunt Irma, their daughter, and this is my grandmother Anna Evenson right here, and her mother and father, of course. I don't remember her name. Do you, Pat? Grandma Evenson? I don't remember.
Yes, it was her maiden name is what you wanted to know. It was Ingeborg Rondina Andresen.
Andresen, very good. Very good, there you go. And this was Edward Fale. He was the brother of Henry Fale, of course, and uncle of Byron, and who's the fellow was the, Gerald was the veterinarian, yeah, right. And this is my father here. He's got kind of my wife said he's kind of an unusual hairdo that he had. It looks like he might have someone must have got at his side here, sideburns here. And this is one of my grandmother's, 2 of my grandmother's brothers. I think this is with Theodore, and this looks like Martin, perhaps. I'm not sure. Well, anyway, that's her family. All right, next. Okay, this is Anna Bassford, Evenson Bassford Vale, and that's Patricia. Wasn't she a cute girl in her young days? And this I suspect this is Keith, right?
No, that's Craig.
Oh, that's Craig, our second boy. Yes, he's living down in Illinois, right? Right, Craig, yeah. Okay, yeah. Okay, next. Okay, now we're in the, let's see where we can start here with this. Yeah. All right, we will start with that now. As they mentioned on the film, back in those days, I don't think that my grandfather, Edward Vail, a step-grandfather, I should say, made 1,500 pounds. They made an awful lot. I know that. Pat might know more about that than I do.
Grandma used to make
right.
the sugar in the house because that was a tedious thing. It had to be stirred with a wooden spatula.
Oh, yeah.
And then she put it in molds.
In the molds, yeah. All right, anyway, to tell a little bit, I can tell a little about some of you may know much about as I do. But I remember going out there and helping as a teenager. I was in high school. Anyway, if you notice, there's a little spigot. This spigot here, it was pushed into the tree, maybe about 3 inches or so forth. Of course, I should say that the ideal time for making maple syrup is in about April. It has to be cool at night or maybe slightly freezing, but then warm up quickly during the day. And usually they like to tap the trees on the southern edge of the tree because they get the sunlight. And of course, the ideal is to get the ideal is to have a sugar maple trees or other maple trees, but they aren't quite as prolific as far as producing the sap. Anyway, this is interesting. If you look up on the internet, you can find all sorts of information about this. There's columns of information on maple syrup. Just put it on the internet if you are interested at all. It takes 40 gallons of maple sap to produce 1 gallon of maple syrup. Just think of that, 40 to 1.
Barrels
Yeah.
that they used to have? They
Yeah.
take 1 barrel of the sap to make 1 gallon of syrup.
That's about right. It was 40 to 1. And okay. All right, here, maybe you can get into a different position. Get another one. And that's a long. Oh, Bassford, huh? Oh, this is, here we go. Yeah, now here, we can start there. Notice that we have the buckets. They hold maybe a couple of gallons. And in the early days, they didn't have covers over them, and you get debris in them, so they had to run it through a funnel, and which had a screen in it, and they would filter out the debris. But I was going to say that they'd like to collect these every day or so, especially if you had a rainfall, because that would kind of contaminate and I don't know if it would completely spoil it, but they had to empty that daily if possible. And this is Grandpa Edward Vail collecting it, and we'll go on to the next one and tell what they did. Well, here he's boiling it. This is an evaporator. They had what they call, I guess they call it a sap house. I don't know why that's where they did the boiling. It was an evaporator. I would judge that was about 25 feet long, and Grandpa used cordwood for the fire to boil the sap to get rid of the water, and then he had kind of a siphoning system that went from one section to the next. I think maybe a half a dozen sections. Well, it got way back to the end of the evaporator, and there it was, of course, was into syrup by that time already. And of course, I don't know how much more they had to work at it. They got, and they brought it home, and to get to pour it into their mold to make the maple sugar. But I remember, Pat, you could probably, because you were there and I wasn't when Grandma canned these, but I believe she put it in about a quart. Was it about a quart can? All right, now, yes, I remember they sold it because I remember we used to buy some, and it was $2.25 for a quart. Just think of that. And that would be about 7 cents an ounce. Today, you have to pay about anywhere from 50 to 75 cents an ounce for maple syrup. Of course, you say, well, that's awfully high. Yes, it is. When you stop and think of fudge, for example, fudge goes for about $1.25 an ounce. So you have to be 20. I think it's purchased some recent was what $22.50, I think, for a pound or pound and a quarter or something. That's so very high. All right, now after you collect that happens to be me and my dad. And here we were pouring the sap into the barrel. We had collected the sap in 3 barrels, and you poured it in this large funnel, which I said it had a screen in there so it caught any debris. And as soon as these were filled, then I suspect that we did this whole operation pretty much the way Grandpa George did it way back 40 or 45, 50 years before, because some of that equipment had been there an awfully long time. So then they went around the woods there. You can see the trees were not leafed out or anything yet. It was just early April when we were out there. And my dad used to like to wear a hat. I don't know, somebody asked me why he wore a hat. And I don't know why. Dad always liked to wear hats. I don't know. He had a good head of hair and so forth. But anyway, that's what I was looked at about, I think it was about 15 years old, 14 or 15 at that time. Okay, next, Linda.
Charlie, this is now Maple Heights subdivision.
Pardon me?
This is now Maple Heights subdivision.
Oh, that's right. That's what it's called out there. Right, yeah. Thank you for that comment. Okay. Next. Okay. All right, this shows a picture of what the little spigot that went into the tree. My dad always used to say it didn't do any good for the trees because when they would have to cut the tree down for cordwood, it was always kind of a not rotten, but it was kind of a deteriorated place in that tree, and it just kind of powdered up, and so it probably didn't do the tree any good. Okay, anyway, those buckets were not. Those were the old original wooden buckets. I wish we could have kept a couple of those. Pardon me?
How did you keep it on the tree?
Oh, there was a little place where on that spigot there was a little place where you could hang it hang the hook, like a little hook. You could hang it on that. Yeah, so it went in about 3 inches into the tree, so there was plenty of leverage there for it. All right, as they were collected, I don't know if Grandpa Phil did this or with Grandpa George Bassford, probably a combination of two. We would bring the filled barrels. Each one, probably those are 55 gallons. I'm not sure. I think so. And they'd lift them up with this rather clever device they had, and lift them up. This is Grandpa Phil right here, and a couple of, I think those are Roger Schrader's children over there. I'm not sure that gentleman was. Pat, would you have any idea who it might be? One of their hired men, perhaps.
No, that was his brother George that.
Oh, you think that was George? Maybe it was. Okay, yeah. Yes, Uncle George lived with them. He was a farmhand there for them all those years, yes, for his brother. Okay, then we lift them up. Maybe the next picture, Linda. Oh, here, they're still. Was that all there was in that? Oh, well, anyway, I should go on and finish that. So, that's Roger Schrader, who I'm sure some of you knew. He was a curator of the museum for many years, and those are his 2 children. I can't remember. I'm sure I remember their names. Do you know those? Be the names of the Roger's children? I don't know. Some of you may know. Anyway, one of them lived in Stern Bay. That's Roger looking at the contents of the barrel that's or the connector for the device that's collecting it. Pardon me?
Is he smelling it or licking it?
Yeah, right, yeah, right, yeah, right. Okay, next. There, now that's how you can see the 3 barrels on the sled. So you can see that it was still snow, so it was winter, hadn't melted yet. And those were my granddad's horses. One was Beauty. I don't remember the dark one, but this one, the grandma's called me. What is it, Queen? Beauty and Queen. Okay, very good. And we hauled it in on a sled. They had a regular path through the woods. You can see it was right in the middle of the woods there, and pretty good size. Those are pretty good sized trees yet. All right, next. Here's another shot of that, and they were pretty heavy. Remember, those are 55-gallon drums, and 3 of them. There were several, I suppose, close to half a ton of liquid there. Okay, there's Grandpa collecting them, or lifting it. And there he is running the evaporator. And there we are pouring it in. That pretty runs it down. They had to boil it for hours and hours to get rid of the to get rid of the water and make it into maple syrup. Okay? Yes.
When they were at the peak of the syrup making season, Grandpa never came home at night. He had to stay right there to watch it for fear it would scorch.
Yes, I remember him saying that. Yeah, you watch it. I didn't realize his date once had a cot or
He stayed
something.
right there.
Very good. That's a good point. Yeah. Had to watch it. Other would burn, scorch, like you said. Are there any questions that you may have regarding that?
Well, not with the maple syrup, but I was wondering about the log house and brought over to the farm. How did that come about?
Well, Grandpa built it in 1858, and they kept that. And it was on the farm. I can remember when I was a kid, but that it was what's his name? It was a principal of the school here. Purchased. What? And he was who was it? Okay, very good. Wait.
Carl, do you want to tell us
Tell us about that. How you got about to purchase the old house.
Yes.
You want to come and tell us how you
Purchased it for $5.
Is that right?
It was.
How did you
The
move
logs
it?
were all in perfect condition, but that's all there was. The roof was gone.
Oh yeah.
And incidentally, that's the woodshed at the farm. That's a Simon building. Some or other got the wrong shot up there.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know
The
that.
Bassford house is larger than that and nicer, it's larger log.
Oh.
So we'll have to correct that in some way. But
Well,
I
learned something.
Bill Knotts found a sand bucket under some sheet metal in the maple wood, and gave it. It was all in pieces. I put it together, and that's on display at the sugar shack at the farm. And we also have the maple sugar molds that was used to make the maple sugar. It had once had about 50 little rectangular compartments in it.
Well, thanks.
Carl,
Yeah.
when did you move that? When did you move the log cabin over
I
there?
think about 1966 or 67.
How?
Well,
Take it all apart?
it was in pieces. Each log, we marked the logs and moved them, but there were only the logs that remained. The roof was gone.
Were they in good condition? The logs in good condition yet?
Pardon?
Were the logs fairly good condition?
Yes, they're in excellent, there was cedar.
Oh yeah.
Excellent, they're still in excellent condition today.
Very good. Well, thanks much for those comments.
You're very,
Appreciate that. Yeah. Anyone else? have
You're
a
very
question?
welcome.
Charlie,
Yes.
where exactly was that log house located relative to the new
That was located behind the main big house at the end of the long building in there. Pat and I have a little bit of a difference of opinion. She may be right. She lived there. I didn't. The long building, I was told, was in the paper that I had, was the place where they roomed and boarded people. But at the end, on the west end of that particular long building, is where that's at. Because I remember going in there as a lad, and that's where it's at. Is that where you picked that building up, or where did you?
A little bit east of the present building is where the log building was.
Okay, right, okay, fine.
Charlie,
Right alongside
where's
of it.
the location again?
What's that?
Where is the location of
Oh,
this?
this is on Highway 57 at the farm over here, right? As you come around, before you hit the big bend, be right near where Dorothy lives, right? It's just up the road, just a piece west of that, right, Dorothy? Am I right? I haven't been in there for years. I was there years ago, but I haven't been there of late years. Anyone else have a comment or a question? Linda?
We have Mrs. Elby who used to live
In that house.
in their house.
What about it?
I
She
lived
lived
in
there.
their house for 22
Yes,
years,
yes.
and I rented out sleeping rooms in it.
No, Sheena, Grandma Vail never lived in. They lived in the big house.
I lived
Oh, you did. Oh, you lived in the big house.
They remodeled and did the new windows and
Oh, sure.
insulated it.
Oh, yes.
But the inside we left the same because I liked it.
What years? Do you recall what years you lived in it?
When did I, 66
Since 1968, oh yeah.
Yeah, for about 22
I think several people have owned it down through the years, haven't they? Yes, right, yeah. I know.
I had the whole history, and when we bought it, the bank said I couldn't keep the abstracts because I might lose it or something.
Oh,
And when George Evenson was talking to me about the history of it, I remembered a lot, but I tried to go get it. They didn't have it. Because what they did was they got rid of the paperwork and only had the basics. They didn't have all this personal, this person married this, and, everything.
That's not up in the registered deeds in the courthouse, no? Or government center, they don't call it the courthouse anymore, it's the government center, no. Right, yeah, it's too bad, that's too bad. All right, were there any other comments or questions that you might have? Yes, over here. Someone nice on the hand up, or Sue.
I'd like to know the story.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, sir.
I'd like to know the real story about the Native Americans and Grandma and Grandpa with the baskets.
Pat could relate that. Pat, why don't you tell about that?
How do you hold this? Right here? I remember Grandma telling me about when she said when great-grandfather, when they built that first log house, that they had to go between the stumps with grub hoe and so on and so forth and do it the hard way until they got it cleared. And then they cleared a little more land. Everything had to be done by hand. And she said the Indians used to come up to the door and they liked the bread that she baked. And they'd barter. In other words, if they had game, then they'd trade that for the bread. And they had no real trouble at all. But I was thinking when you were telling about great-grandfather, when he came from Green Bay to Sturgeon Bay, would you believe they walked? And it was in the woods. And they had to follow, along the shoreline and so on. And when he got to what is now Sevastopol, that's when he decided that he was going to stay there. And there was nothing but trees and forest. And they had to clear that in order to make that first log cabin.
Didn't the Indians call her Good Squaw or something?
Oh, yes. Because they liked her. She'd give them the bread, and she got along real well with them.
Okay. Betty, would you like anything that you'd like to relate? If anyone else would like to relate anything that they may have known about the Bassford clan?
I think that log house was the first building constructed in the interior of Sevastopol. Is that correct?
I don't know. I've heard that. I'm not sure I could verify that, but that's what I've heard.
First,
Right, yeah.
in the interior.
Well, George Bassford was a very pioneering and a free-spirited man. There's no question about that. I don't think I would have, looking back in my life, I don't think I've had the nerve or the desire or the fortitude to be able to do what he did. Oh,
I wanted to say that there are Bassfords living in Nottinghamshire, England. That would be Charles and Betty and our aunt, Irma. When she and her husband went over there, they looked them up and met them. Yes, they did. But I don't have the information that she had the names and everything. She went to their homes even. Yeah. And I don't have that information, but I know that she did visit them.
yeah. Listen, I appreciate it. Well, I'm sure you and Janet have probably much more than I have. No, I just have not have access to it. I think Betty has some place. I think they're buried somewhere. Someday Sue said she'll find them for you. So anyway, there's much certainty that you could look at if you're interested, and you can see the dates of the births, and you're welcome to look at that. Any other comments anyone have?
About the cheese factory.
Pardon me?
What do you know about the cheese factory?
I don't know a great deal, Sue, except that I had heard it burned down in the 70s or 80s. Evidently, they were producing enough cheese to distribute or sell to other firms or other farmers in the area. That's the only thing I've heard them talk about. Pat, did you do anything about the?
That had burned down before I
yeah.
Was born, and they never rebuilt it.
Never rebuilt. Yeah.
Grandpa, the great-grandfather and grandpa, neither one of them, they had a cheesemaker, and they probably had more than one over a period of time. And he took care of running that end of the business.
Yeah, there's a well. I suspect it's still there. It's probably capped or covered up by this time. But there was a well on that particular. It's on the southwest corner towards 42 and Dunn Road. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember anything about the schoolhouse that was on the property?
Well, that was that was torn down before I ever went to school, because I went. I think they tore it down. The only thing that was left there was that concrete block that was by the door and the well that was left there, because then the consolidated school was built, and I'm trying to think way back. Let's see, I went there and started school, and let me see, I was 5. So that would be 1926. So it was way before that. Now you know how old I am. Well, I don't make any bones about it. I turned 90 this summer.
Getting up there. Well, listen, we appreciate your willingness to come and listen to our blabber about the Bassford clan, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, you want to talk to me privately, or Pat, or my sister, or Sue, or whoever you want to talk to, the relatives, you're welcome to. Thanks for each of you coming. And now I guess we'll turn the thing over to Linda, and whatever you want to do. Okay?
Well, that was a fantastic kickoff for the Sevastopol Historical Society. Thank you.
I bet the Bassfords wish they had the containers like we have today that you can buy. This particular one was about $41, 40 or 41 something for full of the maple syrup. So they wish they'd had something like that. They didn't have those in those days. Thank you.
Charlie, I assume the Bible is in, since he was an Englishman, I assume the Bible is in English as well. So, okay.
English? Because Grandma's Bible was in German.
No, this is English.
Okay. And then that was Grandpa's Bible.
Okay. Any other questions at all for the Bassford family? Again, thank you so much. Okay.
One statement. I'd like to wish Mom a happy birthday from her little baby boy.
Then, all right. Why don't we all wish her a happy birthday with a short version of happy birthday? Happy birthday.